My name is Marin Hollis, and I was 34 years old the spring my father told me not to come home. I was standing on the flight line at Fort Creighton with a duffel bag against my boot and 9 months of Europe still in my sinuses. 8 days out from the first Easter I would spend with my family since 2022. My phone buzzed in my chest pocket while the buses were still idling. It was my dad. "Easter is better without you. Don't come." I read it 3 times in a parking lot in Kansas, with 200 soldiers moving around me like water around a rock. And then I replied with a single word. After that, I drove down to the county courthouse in Stillwell and made one quiet change to a stack of paperwork that already had my name all over it. 48 hours later, my phone showed 7 missed calls, and one of them wasn't family. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel where we sit with the quiet ones, the people who hold a whole family up for years before anybody notices they're holding anything at all. And what happens on the day they finally set it down? If that sounds like somebody you know or somebody you have been, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I keep a list in my wallet on every rotation. Not a mission list. A coming home list folded into quarters until the creases go soft and furred. That last one had 4 things on it. My mother's ham with the brown sugar crust she pretends is a secret. The chair by the front window in the house on Larch Street. The one that gets the afternoon light around 4. A story about a Bavarian mechanic and a frozen coffee machine that I had been saving 9 months to tell my niece Lila because she is 9 and she thinks everything I do is aircraft carriers. And the word Easter underlined twice. I put in for the leave in January from a hangar in eastern Germany with the wind coming under the doors. It got approved in February. I told exactly one person about it, and that was Sergeant First Class Coy Burkett, who signed the request, and looked at me over his glasses the way he does. "Stillwell," he said. "Not a question." I nodded. 90 miles, I said. 90 miles and 9 months. We came back into Fort Creighton on a Saturday afternoon at the end of March, and the sky over the Cedar Hills was that flat aluminum color Kansas does in early spring. There were families along the fence line with signs. There were kids on shoulders. I don't get mad at the fence, and I stopped that a long time ago because I was going to see all of them in 8 days at a table with a ham on it. That's the thing about a list. You carry it so long it stops being paper and starts being a plan. I had my hand on my duffel strap, and I was thinking about that chair by the window when my phone went off in my pocket. "Easter is better without you. Don't come." That was the whole message with an exclamation point at the end of it that I have thought about more than I want to admit because my father does not use exclamation points. He is a man who writes happy birthday with a period. I stood in the middle of that parking lot with the buses hissing and read it 3 times. I did not text back and ask why. I want to be honest about that because people always ask me why I didn't ask why. It's because I already knew the answer, and asking would have given him a chance to say it out loud. And once a thing like that is said out loud in my family, it becomes furniture. It sits in the room forever. So I did what I have been trained to do since I was 18 years old, which is acknowledge the order and start thinking about the parts of it that don't add up. I typed a single word back and sent it. Understood. In my job, that word is not agreement. It means I have received the instruction. I am not going to argue on this frequency, and I am now going to go find out what is actually happening. Jess Marsh came up beside me with her helmet bag on her shoulder and looked at my face for about 2 seconds. She didn't ask. She said, "You want to ride to the barracks or you want to stand here a while?" I said I'd stand here a while. Then I put my phone away, picked up my duffel, and walked to the arms room to turn in what I had to turn in because the world does not stop for a text message. But I want you to understand something. My father did not tell me to stay away from a party. He told me to stay away from a house I pay for. Here is how my name got on that house. In 2017, my dad's back finally quit on him after 28 years between a packing plant and a rail shop. He had the surgery in 2018 and he did not come back the same. And the job did not wait. In July of 2019, an envelope showed up on Larch Street with the word acceleration in it, which is a polite way of saying you have 3 payments left before we take this from you. I was 27. I was a sergeant at this time stationed right up the road, and I had exactly one thing of value in this world, which was the home loan benefit you earn by serving. Not money. I have never had money. Just a door the government holds open for you once, and I used it on them. We closed in September of 2019. $142,000. Nothing down. My signature on every page. The payment with taxes and insurance is $1,180 a month, and it comes out of my account on the 3rd. 78 of those have gone through. I have never been late. Not from Kansas, not from Afghanistan, not from a folding chair in Germany, with the internet cutting out. My parents were going to pay me $400 a month toward it when they could. They could until about 2023. I never asked for it after that because asking would have made it a debt, and I didn't want it to be a debt. I wanted it to be the reason nobody in that family ever had to open an envelope like that again. So when people hear my father told me not to come to Easter, they picture a woman being left off a guest list. That is not what happened. I own the roof. I hold the loan. My name is the only name on it, and I still knock when I go there. I called my mother the next morning from the parking lot outside the barracks because Sunday is when she is softest. June has worked 3 mornings a week in an elementary school library for 11 years, and she talks the way she shelves books, which is quietly and in the wrong order. "Oh, honey," she said, "you're back. You sound thin." I asked her about the message. She went straight sideways. "Your father's under a lot of stress right now." She said, "That's between you and your dad." That sentence has been in her mouth since I was 12. Then she started talking fast about my brother, about how Wade has been at the shop until 9 every night, about some tax thing. And she said it the way you say a word you've been told not to say. Quick and past it. I let it go by. "Mom," I said, "is something happening with the house?" There was a pause on that line. Not a long one. 2 seconds maybe. And I've spent my adult life listening to equipment for exactly that kind of pause, the half-beat where a thing that should be steady hesitates. "Not that I know of," she said. Then she said she had to get the ham out of the freezer, and that she loved me, and she hung up before I could say it back. I sat in my truck with the engine off. Across the lot, somebody's kids were riding bikes in circles around a light pole. I thought about my mother pulling a ham out of a freezer for a table I had just been uninvited from. In a kitchen, I make a payment on every 3rd of the month. And I thought about those 2 seconds. My mother is not a liar. She is something worse and much more common. She is a woman who will not say a true thing out loud if somebody else in the house has decided it stays quiet. Monday I did the boring thing that changed my whole year. Deployment pay stops when you come home. And these special allotments go with it. So, I sat down on my bunk with my laptop to move the auto-pay date on the mortgage from the 3rd to the 1st of the month because my regular pay lands on the 1st and I like margin. I have done this after every rotation since 2019. It takes 4 minutes. I logged into the loan server, and there on the account summary above the balance was a line I had never seen on my own account before. Payoff demand requested by Hartwell Title Company. Date requested March 12th. I want to be clear about what that meant to me sitting there. A payoff demand is what a title company orders when somebody is about to close on that house. Either a sale or a refinance. And on the 12th of March, I had been in a hangar 4,000 miles away with a torque wrench in my hand. I did not call my dad. I want you to know that because that is the part everybody gets wrong when it happens to them. I did not call anybody. I got out my green notebook, the one I use on the maintenance floor, and I wrote the time and the date at the top of a clean page, the way I would if I had found a discrepancy on an aircraft. Then I wrote 3 questions. Who ordered it? Under what authority does it? I took a screenshot for myself. My hands were fine. My hands are always fine. That's the whole problem with me. And then I picked up my phone and called the number on the back of my own mortgage statement because I am the borrower and the borrower gets to ask. The woman at Prairie Crest Savings was pleasant and thorough and had absolutely no idea she was ruining my life. She verified me 3 ways and then read it off her screen like a weather report. Cash out refinance application in process. Loan amount requested $200,000. Cash to borrower at closing $58,000. Scheduled to close Tuesday, April 7th. And then the part where the floor went out from under the room. Signing on the borrower's behalf under a durable general power of attorney. She said, executed February 2022. Renewed July 2025. Agent of Record Howard. I said, "Thank you very much." And I meant it, and I hung up. February 2022. I was 3 weeks from a deployment, and I sat in the legal assistance office on post and signed a power of attorney so my dad could deal with the house while I was gone. Every soldier does it. He used it in 2023 when the hailstorm took half the roof, and the insurance needed a signature I couldn't give from where I was. He did that right. He did that well. That's exactly why I renewed it last July without thinking twice. I called the house. Wade picked up, and I could tell right away he had it on speaker because his voice had that hollow kitchen sound.
"Hey," he said.
Too loud.
"Hang on."
And behind him, from over by the sink, not shouting, not even talking to me, my father said something to my mother in the flat voice he uses for fax. Nobody sets a plate for the furnace. Wade got the speaker off about a second and a half too late. He said my name twice. I said I'd call him back. I sat there on the end of my bunk in a room that smelled like floor wax, and I understood that I had not been left out of a holiday. I had been reclassified, and it happened years ago, and I was the last one to be told. Let me tell you what $58,000 means when your name is the only name on the note. It means $58,000 of new debt with my social security number under it spread across 23 more years on top of what was already there. It means the payment goes from $1,180 to somewhere north of $1,600, and I am the one it comes out of on the third forever. It means the home loan benefit I earned, the one door I get, the one I already spent on them in 2019 stays buried under that roof even deeper than it already was. And there is a piece of this that has nothing to do with money. I work on the electronics that let aircraft talk and see. That work requires a clearance. And a clearance looks at your finances. Because a person underwater is a person who can be bought. I have watched a good crew chief lose his access over $11,000 in credit cards his wife opened. He didn't do anything wrong. He just couldn't explain it fast enough. So it wasn't a house. It was a house. My credit, my clearance, and the job I've been doing since I was 19 years old. I told Jess exactly one sentence about it that night, standing outside the shop bay with the wind coming across the field. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go look at it." Then I went to Burkett and asked for the 2 days of leave I had already been approved for in April. Moved up to that week instead. He didn't ask why. He signed it, handed it back, and said, "Stillwell." Not a question again. I filled my tank Monday night. Same truck, same road, same 90 miles, just not for a ham. You take Interstate 72, east out of Mercer Junction to Bridgeport, then drop south on Highway 224 and let the Cedar Hills carry you down through Lone Elm. In April, those hills are still the color of a paper bag, burned over in patches, with the new green just starting in the low places. It is 1 hour and 45 minutes, and I have driven it about 400 times. I used to do it every other weekend. I used to bring groceries. Somewhere around 2021, I noticed I had started calling first. And somewhere around 2023, I noticed I had started asking if it was a good weekend. And I never once asked myself when that shift happened or who decided it. Larch Street is 8 blocks off the main drag, a run of low ranch houses with chain link and basketball hoops over the garages. The one I pay for is the third from the corner, with the pale siding I paid to have put on in 2021. My mother's tulips were up along the walk. The porch light was on in the middle of the afternoon, which means it's been on since November, which means nobody has thought about it since November. I parked at the curb, not in the drive. That's a thing I do. I have a key to that house. It rides on my dog tag chain. A brass key worn so smooth on one side you can't read the number stamped in it anymore, because it has been rubbing against my sternum through 3 deployments. I have had that key for 7 years. I have used it to let myself in maybe twice. I walked up the driveway of the house that is legally mine, and I knocked. He opened the door, and he was not surprised to see me, and that told me everything about how the next 10 minutes were going to go. The kitchen table was clear, wiped down. No mail, no folders, nothing but a napkin holder. My father does not clear a table. My father is a man who lets the mail pile up until my mother moves it. He poured himself coffee from the pot and did not offer me any and sat down. So he said I sat across from him and I put it in front of him plain because that's the only way I know how. There's a cash-out refinance closing on the 7th. 58,000 signed under my power of attorney. He blew across his cup.
It's my house, he said.
Dad, I said. My name is the only name on that loan. And he looked at me then, and his face was not angry. It was patient, which was worse. Your name's on it, he said, because that's your part. He said it the way you'd explain a shift schedule.
He wasn't insulting me.
In his head, he had just reminded me of something I'd temporarily forgotten. I asked him what the money was for, and he said family business. I asked him, what happens when I say no? And he took a drink of his coffee and said, you won't. Not with any heat. Just the way you say the sun comes up. Behind him, the clock over the stove was doing that tick done since 2019. I looked at that wiped-down table and understood that he had cleaned it before I got there. He knew I was coming. He had thought about this conversation, and he had decided the way to win it was to be calm and to be right. And he had already put the folders somewhere I wouldn't see them. My mother caught me in the hallway by the coat hooks and hugged me the way she does, which is fast and with her shoulders up like somebody might see. You look thin, she said again. I said, Mom. She got hold of my forearm.
Don't make a scene, honey, she said.
Just let it be till after the holiday. Let it be. I said, Mom, if I say no to this, what happens to me in this house? And she looked at the wall behind my head. She did not say, you'll always be my daughter. She did not say, don't be ridiculous. She did not say anything at all. And I stood there long enough to let her not say it twice. Then she patted my arm and went into the kitchen. And I followed her as far as the doorway, and I watched her take plates down out of the cabinet for supper. She took down 4. My dad, herself, Wade, and Rennie were coming by later. She counted them out with her lips moving a little the way she does, and she set 4 on the counter, and I was standing 8 feet away in her line of sight the whole time. She wasn't being cruel. That's what I want you to understand about my mother. She had simply done the arithmetic of that house. And in that arithmetic, I am not a person who eats there. I am the reason the lights are on. I said goodbye to her back. I told her I'd be at the diner in the morning if anybody wanted to talk to me like an adult. She said, drive safe, honey. And she never turned around. And I went out the front door of my own house and pulled it shut soft behind me so it wouldn't slam. Pine Creek Repair and Welding is a metal building on the east edge of town with 3 bays and a gravel lot. Wade has had it 6 years. He was still there at 7 that night with the door up and a heater running. And when he saw my truck, he put his hands on top of his head like a man being arrested. Marin, he said, I'm sorry. He said that 4 times over the next 20 minutes, and he meant it every time, and it changed exactly nothing. The number is $31,000 in back payroll taxes. He'd been carrying his 3 guys through slow winter by paying them and not paying the withholding, which is the single fastest way I know for a decent man to become a criminal by accident. There was a notice taped inside the office window. He told me Dad had it handled. I asked him if he knew where handled was coming from. He looked at the floor. Then he looked up and he said, can you sign? And I want to be fair to my brother here because he heard himself say it. His face came apart a little, but he still said it. That's the thing about that house. It doesn't make people cruel. It just makes them reach. If you have ever been the one everybody calls when the bill comes due, you already know what my chest felt like standing in that shop. Tell me in the comments, what's the thing your family keeps coming back to you for? I read them. And if you want to know how this ended, stay with me and hit subscribe, because I promise you it is not what I thought it would be either. I got a room that night at a motel out on the highway, 11 minutes from a house I own. Nobody came to the Broadmoor diner the next morning except my Aunt Calla, which I should have predicted. She is my father's older sister, 67, 31 years at the post office, and she has an opinion about everything and a side on nothing. She sat down across from me in the vinyl booth, ordered coffee, and said, you look thin. Then she said, he's not going to move, Marin. And I said, I know. And she stirred her coffee for a while and told me something I had never heard in my life. My father quit school at 17, not because he was in trouble, because his own father hurt his hip at the elevator in Lone Elm in 1980, and the check stopped. Dad went into the plant, and he sent money home every 2 weeks for 16 years until my grandfather died in 1996. Calla said it plain, no drama, buttering toast. 16 years. She said her father never once thanked him for it. She said her father would take the envelope and put it in the drawer and ask if Howard had gotten a haircut.
He learned it, Calla said.
Same way you learned it. Then she wiped her fingers on the napkin and said, "Now I'm not getting in the middle of this, and I want that understood." And she left me the check. I sat in that booth for a while after she was gone. I had come in there angry at one man. I walked out understanding that I was sitting inside a machine that was older than I was, that had already eaten my father at 17, and that had been running so long nobody in my family could even see it anymore. And I was the part it was running on now. I drove back up to Post that afternoon, and I worked a half shift because I would rather work than sit. That night, I was in my room with the lights off, except the desk lamp, and I pulled my dog tag chain off over my head to put it on the hook the way I do, and I sat there on the edge of the bunk holding it. 2 tags, 1 silencer, and that brass house key. 7 years of that key rubbing on my breastbone. In Afghanistan, it left a mark that took 2 months to fade. There's a groove worn into the flat of it, and the stamped number is gone completely, rubbed off against me. I have carried that key through 3 deployments to a house where I knock at the door. I want to be careful how I say this next part because it wasn't a decision yet. I wasn't there yet. I just could not stand the weight of it against my chest for one more night. So, I worked it around the split ring with my thumbnail until it came off. And I set it in the empty coffee can on my desk where I keep hardware. And I put the chain back on over my head, and it was lighter. That is the part one did not expect and did not want. It was noticeably lighter, and I lay down in the dark and hated how much better it felt, because if it felt better, then I had been carrying something I did not have to carry. And if that was true, then everything after 19 years old needed to be looked at again. I did not sleep much. In the morning, I put in a request to see legal assistance. Captain Davin Ruiz had a cinder block office with a dyeing plant and a coffee maker that had opinions. He read the loan summary I printed out, and he did the thing good lawyers do, which is not react. Then he laid it out for me in about 6 minutes. That power of attorney is mine. He said I gave it, so I can take it back any time for any reason without anyone's permission. Sign a revocation in front of a notary. Record it with the Register of Deeds in the county where the property sits. Send certified copies to the lender and the title company and put written notice on the loan file. That's it. That's the whole thing. Cost me a morning and $21 in recording fees. He also said something else near the end, sort of in passing while he was capping his pen. If it ever came to it, he said, a loan like yours can be assumed by somebody else. But if the person taking it over isn't a veteran, your entitlement stays tied up in that house until the loan is gone. So don't do that casually. I nodded and said, okay. And I did not think about it again for 9 days. I asked him one more question on my way out, and it was not a legal question. I said, Captain, is there a version of this where nobody loses anything? He looked at me for a second too long. He said, Ma'am, I do wills and powers of attorney. Then he said, take the weekend. And I did. I took the weekend, and I did one thing first, and it was the last decent offer anybody in my family was ever going to get for me. I called my father Thursday evening, and I had it written down, so I wouldn't get lost. Here's my offer, I said. I'll co-sign a separate loan for Wade's payroll taxes, $31,000 in his name and mine, at a real rate, on a real schedule, and I'll cover it if he stumbles. In exchange, the cash out on the house goes away, and the house doesn't get touched. It was a better deal for them than the refinance. Less debt, better terms, faster relief, and my brother stays out of trouble with the government. I ran the numbers twice on the hood of my truck before I dialed. My father did not need 3 seconds.
No, he said.
I asked him why. He said, because that's not how this works. And I said, how does it work, Dad? And he said, I decide, and you help. There it was. The whole architecture of my life laid out in one flat stretch of Kansas plain speak. It was never about the $58,000. He could have had $31,000 of relief that night, cleaner, cheaper, and he turned it down inside of a breath because taking terms from me would have meant I was somebody who gets to set terms. That's not a daughter. That's a party to a negotiation. I sat in my truck in this barracks lot with the phone in my lap and the heater ticking. Everything I had told myself for 15 years assumed we were arguing about money, and money is a thing you can solve. You can work more hours at money. You cannot work more hours at rank. Then he said, "Be reasonable," and hung up on me. And I realized I was not going to be able to buy my way back to that table, because the table was never for sale. Friday morning, I got a text from Rennie, my brother's wife, who is a dental assistant and the only person in that family who will occasionally say a true thing, though only in writing where she can delete it. "You should know what he's telling people," she wrote. Then a screenshot from the church group chat at Bethel Community Church. Someone had asked my mother if her daughter was coming home for Easter since she'd been overseas, and my father had answered to himself, "Marin's choosing to stay on post. She doesn't much like coming home anymore." That was it. No lie in them you could point at either, which is the craftsmanship of it. Every word technically survivable. I was in the parking lot at the commissary when I read it, and I sat there with a cart full of groceries and did the math on what he had just done. He hadn't only kept me from the table. He had gone around and quietly replaced the version of me that lives in other people's heads. In the story, the whole town has now a woman who got distant, and there's no way to argue with that, because arguing proves it. If I call Aunt Kella and say that's not true, I'm the one making a scene at Easter. I said it out loud in my truck alone, and I heard my own father's voice come out of my mouth. "Nobody sets a plate for the furnace." Then I put the groceries in the back and drove them to the barracks and put them in a fridge in a hallway because I did not have a kitchen. I have a house. I do not have a kitchen. That was Friday. Easter was Sunday. I wrote my father a long message 3 times that weekend and deleted all 3. The first one had the numbers in it. 78 payments, $92,000, the roof, the water heater in 2020, the $400 a month that stopped in 2023, and how I never once asked about it. The second one was worse because it was hurt instead of angry. And hurt is a thing you hand a man like my father, and he puts it in a drawer. The third one was 3 lines long and almost fair, and I deleted it, too, because I finally understood that there was nothing I could write that he would receive. He wasn't misinformed. He was not going to be persuaded by better information. So, I went to work on Saturday instead. There was a phase inspection running on one of the aircraft, and I spent 9 hours with my head in a nose bay pulling connectors and testing continuity, and my hands were absolutely steady the entire time. That is the strange gift of my job. On the maintenance floor, nobody wants anything from me except that I do it right. There is no version of me there that owes anybody. When I closed out my entry in the logbook at the end of the shift, I signed my name and my rank. And then in the margin at the bottom where nobody reads, I wrote a single word to myself. Understood. Then I checked the calendar on my phone. The closing was Tuesday the 7th at 4 in the afternoon at Hartwell Title in Stillwell. Easter was Sunday. I had one day in between, and I still had not decided anything. And I want you to believe that because I hadn't. Easter Sunday, I ate in the dining facility on post. There were maybe 30 of us. They had put out plastic eggs on the tables, which somebody meant kindly, and there was a ham, and it was fine. Jess came and sat with me and talked about her sister's dog for 20 minutes without once asking me a question, which is the single greatest act of friendship I have ever received. And around 1, my phone started going off because I was still in the family group chat. Nobody had removed me. That's the detail I want you to sit with. Nobody thought to remove me because it never occurred to any of them that I would be reading it. The pictures came in one after another. My mother's ham with the brown sugar crust. Lila in a yellow dress holding up a dyed egg, laughing with her eyes shut. Wade carving, the table with the good cloth on it, my father at the head with his coffee, the chair by the window with the 4 o'clock light coming across it. And I sat in a dining facility in Mercer Junction and looked at photograph after photograph of the inside of my own house. The house is in every single frame. The siding I paid for. The water heater behind that wall. The roof over all of them. I am in none of them. I did not leave the chat. I did not type anything. I turned my phone face down on the table next to a plastic egg, and I thought the sentence my father said over the sink in his voice, not mine. And it was the truest thing anybody in my family has ever said about me. Then I went back to my room and sat on the bunk in the dark for about an hour. There was no lightning. I want to be honest about that too, because people expect a moment where something breaks and you become a different woman. That is not how it went. What happened is that I got up off the bunk, went out to my truck in the dark, sat in the driver's seat, and did the thing I do before any job I am nervous about. I took out the green notebook, and I built a sequence. That's all. Order of operations, times, and the cost of each step. Line 1, sign the revocation. Line 2, recorded at the county. Line 3, notice to the lender, the title company, and the server. I put times next to each one. 8, 11:31. Then I sat there with the pen, and I made myself write the last line. Because you do not start a job without knowing what it takes off the aircraft. And the last line was not about money. It said, this ends the version of me they can call. I read it back. I thought about my grandfather taking an envelope out of my father's hand and putting it in a drawer and asking about a haircut. I thought about my father at 17 walking into a plant. And I thought somebody in this family has to be the one who stops, and there is nobody behind me to do it. And I am the only one holding a thing I can actually put down. Then I closed the notebook and set my alarm for 5:30, and I slept better than I had in 9 days, which I still find hard to forgive myself for. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, legal assistance. Captain Ruiz had the form ready because I'd emailed him Sunday night. It is 1 page. It has a title at the top that says Revocation of Power of Attorney. And then it says in language 100 years older than me that the authority I granted on a certain date is withdrawn as of today. That's the whole document. There's more paperwork in adopting a cat. A civilian notary from 2 doors down came in with her stamp and her logbook and asked to see my identification. And I handed her my military ID, and she asked me to state my name, and I did. Ruiz witnessed it. The notary pressed her seal into the paper, and the sound it made was like a stapler. Ruiz asked me one question before I picked it up. Do you want to give them notice first? And I thought about it honestly for a second because I am not a person who enjoys ambushing anybody. But here is why I said no. And it isn't the reason you think. It's not that I wanted them blindsided. It's that a warning would have turned into a conversation. And a conversation with my father is a negotiation. And I have never in 34 years won a negotiation with that man.
Not one.
He would have talked me around by Wednesday. He has done it every time. So I said no. Ruiz nodded and handed me the certified copies. And I noticed on my way out to the truck that my hands were perfectly steady and that this time it did not comfort me at all. The Register of Deeds in Cedar County is a form counter on the first floor of a county building that smells like toner and floor cleaner. I drove down the 90 miles and stood in line behind a man recording a lien on a stock trailer. When it was my turn, I slid the page across and said I needed it recorded. The clerk read the title, turned it over, checked the notary block, and said, $21. I paid in cash. She put it under the stamp and hid it, and the machine printed the date and the time and a book and page number in the corner, and it went into the public record of the county my family has lived in since 1957. That was it. No music. A woman behind me was already stepping up with a deed. Then I sat in my truck in the courthouse lot and sent the certified copies by email to Prairie Crest Savings and Hartwell Title Company and called the server and had them note the loan file. And I got confirmation numbers for all 3 and wrote them in the green notebook. And then I drove back up to post. I want to say something here because somebody watching is holding a pen over a page like that right now. You are allowed to take your own name back. That is all I did. There was no trap in it and no revenge in it. If that is landing somewhere in your chest, leave a comment because I read them and subscribe because what happened next is the part 1 still think about. Walking out of that building, I said it out loud to myself. The same word I'd sent my father a week before. Understood. Tuesday was the longest quiet day of my adult life. I went to work. Phones don't come out on this maintenance floor, so mine sat in a locker in the shop office from 6:40 in the morning until we closed out, and I stood in a nose bay with a meter in my hand running continuity checks on a wiring harness. I did good work. That is not me bragging. It is me telling you that a person can hold a whole other life in their chest and still torque a fitting correctly. And most of the women watching this already know that. Around 11, I caught myself doing arithmetic instead of reading a gauge, and I made myself stop and start the check over from the beginning, which is the only professional thing I did all day. At about 2 in the afternoon, Sergeant First Class Burkett came through the bay on his rounds, stopped, looked at me for a second, and said the only useful thing anybody said to me that entire month. Whatever it is, Hollis, you already did it. Now you just have to stand there. Then he kept walking. He never asked me what it was. He never has. At 4 in the afternoon, 90 miles southeast of me, four people sat down at a conference table at Hartwell Title Company in Stillwell with a stack of documents and a notary, and a woman from the title company opened a file and found a certified copy of a recorded revocation sitting on top of it. And the whole thing died right there on the table. I did not know that. My phone was in a locker. I finished my shift. Wednesday at 5:40 in the evening, I opened my locker and the screen lit up before I even had it in my hand. 7 missed calls. I stood there in the shop office with my sleeves still rolled and went down the list. 3 from my dad at 12:14, 12:19, and 1:02. 2 from my mother, 1 from Wade at 3:50, and 1 at 4:31 from a landline in Carsonville that I had never seen in my life. 48 hours, almost to the minute, from a clerk's stamp coming down on a Formica counter. That is how long it takes for a family to notice you exist. There was 1 voicemail, not from my father. He has never left a voicemail in his life. He considers them a waste of a stamp. It was the Carsonville number. A man's voice, middle-aged, reasonable, a little tired, with the sound of an office behind him. Miss Hollis, my name is Brett Hennings. I represent your parents. I'd appreciate a call at your convenience today or tomorrow so we can get in front of this before it becomes something none of us want.
Thank you.
That was the whole message. Polite as a church usher. I stood there and listened to it twice. And then I did the thing that tells you exactly what 9 days had done to me, because a month earlier I would have called my father first, apologizing before he picked up already half-talked out of it. I did not call my father. I went out to my truck where it was quiet and I called the lawyer. Brett Hennings was decent to me, which I did not expect. He confirmed who I was, and then he talked for a while in the careful language lawyers use when they are pushing on something they know will not move.
Costs have been incurred, he said.
There's been detrimental reliance on the expectation of these funds. Let's avoid an unnecessary escalation here. I let him finish. Then I said, Mr. Hennings, I'm the sole borrower on that note, and I revoked my own power of attorney. Is there any part of that you're telling me was improper? And there was a pause on his end, and he said, no, ma'am, there isn't. And I heard him decide to stop pushing. Then he gave me a number I did not have. 2 weeks before the closing, my father had gone to a short-term lender against the expected proceeds and pulled $9,000 out early. He had already handed it to Wade to stop the enforcement action on the shop. That money was gone, spent, and the interest on it was running at a rate I don't want to say out loud on this channel. It had been a bridge across 2 weeks. Now it was a hole with no other side. I sat in my truck in the dark with the phone against my ear, and I did not feel 1 ounce of satisfaction.
I want to be honest with you about that.
This is the part nobody tells you. When you finally stop carrying something, it does not float. It falls and it lands on people you love, and some of them did not put it on your back. Hennings said they'd like to sit down with you Saturday. I said I'd be there at 10 o'clock. Saturday the 11th of April, 10 in the morning, that kitchen. My father at the head of the table with his coffee. My mother beside him with her hands in her lap. Wade and Rennie on the other side. Lila in the front room with cartoons on low. And I remember thinking, don't do this with an earshot of a 9-year-old, and then thinking, she's going to grow up in this arithmetic, so maybe she should hear it. Hennings was on the speaker of my father's phone in the middle of the table, like a 5th adult. My father had it all worked out. He laid it down like a foreman handing out a shift. You sign a new power of attorney. We reschedule the closing. Everything goes back to normal. And then he added the part he had clearly been saving. And he said it gently, and that is what made it obscene, and you'll have your chair Marin every holiday. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. I'll say your name at the table. My mother nodded fast and said, we'd love that, honey. We'd love to have you. And then, trying to help, she said the thing she has heard her husband say so many times that it comes out of her without permission. It's not like we don't set a plate for you. Nobody in that room heard it but me. I sat there and understood that he was not bluffing. He would do it. He would say my name every holiday for the rest of his life, and it would be real, and all it cost was everything. That was my list from Germany, sitting on the table in front of me for sale at a price. I said, "Give me a minute." And I went out the back door. He came out after me, which he has never done in his life. The back step of that house is 2 concrete slabs and a rail he put in himself after the surgery. He sat down next to me with his coffee, and we looked at the yard. And then he took a little notebook out of his shirt pocket, green cloth cover, gone pale at the corners, rubber band around it. He opened it and held it where I could see, and it was columns of dates and dollar amounts in pencil and handwriting a lot younger than his is now. 1980 at the top, 96 at the bottom. Every 2 weeks for 16 years, $40, $60, $40, $35, and a line where a week got skipped, and then $80 the next time to make it up. That was my father at 17 and 18 and 24 and 33. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "My dad never once asked me how I was doing it." And then he said the closest thing to an apology that man has in him. I never learned another way to be somebody's father. And for about 4 seconds, I loved him so much I couldn't breathe. Then he closed the notebook and put the rubber band back around it and said, "Don't make that into something it isn't. You've had it easy compared to me." And he got up and went inside first. 4 seconds. That's what I got. But it was enough because sitting on that step, I finally understood that he was not going to change, that he had never once considered changing, and that I had been waiting 15 years for a man to hand me something he does not own. I came back in and sat down and said, "I'm not signing a new power of attorney, and I'm not doing the cash out." My father started to speak, and I kept going because I had one shot at saying it all the way through. And I'm not selling the house either. Everyone in that kitchen had been braced for those 2 doors, the yes door and the eviction door. And I opened a third one. "Mr. Hennings," I said toward the phone, "I want to hand the loan over. My parents take it over from me. The whole thing, the payment and the note and the roof and the bank, and the VA release me from it. They don't buy me out. They don't owe me $1. Nobody moves. Nobody sells. Nobody packs a box. There is no cash coming out of that house for anybody. Not now, not ever, because the money is not the point and never was." Henning said an assumption, and I said yes. Then I told them the price because I was not going to let anybody find it out later and call it a trick. When the person taking over a loan like mine isn't a veteran, I said the benefit I earn stays locked inside the house until the loan is paid off. 23 more years. That door the Army holds open for you one time that I already spent on this family in 2019, I am burying it under this roof for good. I will never buy a house of my own with it. I'll rent. At 57, I will still be renting, and that is my choice, and I am making it with my eyes open. Then I gave them the only condition, and it was not a condition on them. It was a condition on me. This is the last thing. There is no transfer after this. No signature, no power of attorney, no co-signing, no just this once. I am not the furnace anymore, and I'm not the bank. And after today, I'm not the reason anything in this house stays on. I reached into my jacket pocket, and I took out that brass key worn flat on one side, and I set it down in the middle of that formica table, right about where a plate would go. It made a small sound. Nobody picked it up. "I've been paying rent on being your daughter since I was 19. I said, "I'm paid up." From the speaker in the middle of the table, Brett Hennings said, "That's a clean structure, mister." And my father reached over and shut the phone off. I have thought about the next 30 seconds more than any 30 seconds in my life. My father did not yell. I need you to understand that he never yells, and that the man does his falling apart the way other men do arithmetic. He sat very still, and I watched him work it because he is not stupid. He got there faster than my mother did, faster than Wade did. If she gives, then I owe. That's all it was. In the accounting he has run since he was 17 years old. There are people who send and people who decide. And a man who is handed a house by his daughter is not the one deciding anymore. He is the one holding the envelope. He is his own father in that drawer. And he could not be that. Not for one afternoon. Not to keep a roof. His hand started to shake on the handle of the cup. He set it down carefully so it wouldn't rattle. And he pushed his chair back. And he stood up and turned around to the sink with his back to the room. My mother started crying and said, "Marin, don't do this to your father," which I will hear for the rest of my life because I had just given him a house. and she called it doing something to him. Wade put his face in his hands and said, "The shop's done anyway. It's done." Rennie didn't say anything. She just reached across and put 2 fingers on my wrist and took them away again. And my father, standing at the sink with his back to me, running water over nothing, said it back to me. "Understood. That's all." The same word I had sent him, handed back to me across a kitchen. He did not turn around, and I knew, sitting in that chair with my hand flat on the table, that I had just won everything I came for and lost my father in the same minute, and that he had chosen it, and that he would never once describe it that way. I stood up. My whole life, every single time I have gotten up from that table, I have carried my dishes to the sink since I was 6 years old. It is so automatic that I have done it at other people's houses and had to be told to sit down. That morning, there was a coffee cup in front of me that my mother had poured me and I had not touched. I looked at it and I left it where it was, and I walked out of that kitchen. And nobody in this world will ever be able to explain to you why that was the hardest thing I did all year. Because that is when I finally saw it. I had spent 15 years buying a chair at a table where the chair was never for sale, and the rent went up every single time I got a raise. That's all that was ever happening. Lila came out of the front room with her socks slipping on the floor and asked if I was staying for supper. I got down on my heels so we were level. "Not tonight, sweetheart," I said. She said, "Next time?" And I said, "We'll see." Then I went out the front door of the house I had just given away and drove north. The assumption took until the end of June. That is not television. That is just how long a lender and the VA take to move a file. Prairie Crest Savings had to underwrite my parents on their own, which meant my father's disability pension and my mother's 3 mornings a week at the school library had to carry $1,180 a month between them. It was tight, and it went through. And I want you to notice something, because I noticed it in the underwriter's letter, and I had to sit down. They qualified for the payment they already had. They did not qualify for $1 more. The refinance my father was going to sign in my name would have been approved on my income, not theirs. That was the whole machine in one line of a bank letter. I signed the last of it on a Tuesday in late June at a title office in Stillwell, and I was released from the note. 20 minutes, the house is theirs. Nobody moved. Nobody packed a box. The tulips came up again this spring. Pine Creek repair and welding closed in August. The $9,000 my father borrowed against a closing that never happened is still his at a rate that would embarrass a casino, and he is paying it down at about $300 a month out of a pension. Wade took a job at a dealership up in Carsonville doing warranty work, and he is better at it than he was at owning something, and he calls me twice a year, and neither of us can figure out what to say. My mother calls the first Sunday of every month. We talk about the weather and her knee, and whether I am eating. She has never mentioned that morning one time. My father has not spoken to me since he said that word at the sink. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, not once, and I have stopped rehearsing what I'd say. I rent a duplex in Mercer Junction for $875 a month. There is nothing on the walls yet. I have a folding chair and a good lamp and a window that gets light around 4 in the afternoon. And I sit in it, and it is mine in a way nothing has ever been mine. I will be renting for a long time. That was the deal I made, and I made it standing up. And then in October my phone rang, and it was a number I didn't know, and it was Lila using her mother's phone, and she said, "Aunt Marin, Mom says you have your own place now. Can I come see it?" That was the whole call. She did not need anything. She was not calling about a bill or a signature or a payment or a favor. And in 34 years of belonging to that family, she was the first one. I said yes before she finished asking. Then I hung up and opened the cabinet over my sink, and I stood there and looked because at some point that summer, without thinking about it, I had bought 2 plates. If there is one thing I know now that I did not know standing on that flight line in March, it is this. A family that only calls you when something needs paying is not testing your loyalty. It is billing you. And the day you stop paying is the day you find out whether you were ever a daughter or just a line item. And finding that out will cost you almost everything. And it is still the cheapest thing I have ever bought. That's my story. A text on an airfield. A single word back. A $21 filing fee at a county counter. If you have ever signed something for family and never thought about it again, go find out today whose hands your name is still sitting in. That's all I'm asking. Thank you for being here with me. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.